Good morning and welcome to another episode of A Cup of Coffee with Bill. Excited to welcome you all to this episode for a topic that I've had on my mind for a while, just wasn't sure how to get into it. And when you're talking about mental health, it's a serious matter, it's an important matter. So you just dive into it and go with it because there are a lot of directions it can go. And so I asked a former classmate and friend of uh, from Ohio University, now senior marketing manager for brand and sponsorship at BMO Harris Bank, soon to be something exciting in the financial world that we'll let him announce when it's official, Eric Shainock, to come on. And we're talking mental health personally in the sports industry, what we're seeing with athletes in right now, because this is, I think, the biggest moment for us as fans, that we're seeing people take charge of their mental health, regardless of what it does to the action on the courts. So, Eric, welcome to the program, and I'm excited to have you on to talk about this important subject.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you about it, and appreciate you thinking about me.
So just to give us a start, can you give us a quick background on what you do? I know there are some exciting career changes in the works that we don't have to get into, but what are you doing right now? And then how did you come to be such an advocate for mental health? Because part of why I had you on is you wrote a tremendous essay for the Clubhouse Network about your own journey that I was very touched by, and I got a lot out of as it relates to my own personal journey. And so you do have a lot of great points about the topic. So how give us your background, what you're doing, and how did you come to where you're at now?
Yeah, so briefly, background is senior marketing manager at BMO Harris Bank. Wear a couple different hats there. So I oversee brand sponsorship in the US, sponsorship advertising, anything in venue and in market, as well as brand advertising across our footprint, purpose advertising, as well as corporate social media. So we're a bunch of different hats there. And the segue to answer your second part of the question, and one part that I'm most excited about is I also lead meditation and some mindfulness classes with a couple of our teams at BMO. You asked about the mental health and the importance there, and just why, and I'll back up as I answer that. Anyone could fill the shoes at BMO. Anyone can be a president, a marketing manager, you name it. What differentiates us and makes us unique is our journey and our story. And for me, that's really about mental health. I grew up in a family that I thought was pretty functional and pretty typical. And the only difference was that my dad had a lot of mental health issues. So I had a very I was front and center with the ability to see how this interacted with my dad and how he interacted with us. And I say all of that because it took me 10, 15 years to figure out that everyone's like that in some degree. And so the way I describe it now is that in order to show up in your best self at work, you need to be your best self individually. And that means personally, professionally, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and all of that is your mental health. Just like you work out your body, you try and stay fit, you try and grow your muscles, you need to work your brain, which is a muscle as well. And so the analogy I like to use is that people, will go and do cardio and they'll lift weights and they'll, do protein shakes, and they'll take all of these different tips and tools to stay strong. And you can do the same thing in the mental health world. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. So for me, it's something that I've lived with and dealt with for the last 10 to 15 years. And while it was something that, I never used to say at work that I was going to therapy. You're always told to make yourself available at work. Now it's blocked on my calendar and I openly talk about it. So I think we've seen that shift over time, not only in the corporate world, but in the sports world. And I think we've just broken down those barriers. And obviously with COVID and everything that's happened over the last 2 years, I think any last barriers that were in existence are now continuing to be knocked down. So that was a long-winded answer there, but I think probably gives us a couple segues to kind of dig a little deeper.
You nailed the segues for me, and so we'll go back to the past 2 years, and I would probably even say the last 3 before COVID hit. It seemed like our industry in sports business, especially, you started to see some athletes 3-4 years ago take a stand about it, where you had Marshawn Lynch talking about how he manages his mental health and why he's reluctant to sometimes participate in media events and other different obligations that you typically expect of professional athletes. But also looking at the business side of the industry, where you do see a lot of burnout, you do see a lot of turnover, because it is such a high demand, high pressure environment. And, I'm not ashamed to admit that I've made a career move because at one point or another along the way, things got to be too stressful. And I think I was 30 at the time, I didn't think I should be questioning whether or not going into the office that day was a healthy choice for me, because I didn't want to have a panic attack about this, that, or the other. What has been, in your mind, the catalyst on the athlete side, but also on the business side? Because it does seem, like you said, athletes just don't care anymore if they need to step away. And I look at Naomi Osaka, she's been unrelenting about protecting herself mentally through the rigors of her sport, and being very open about the struggles that she faces. What has changed that has made it more acceptable and open, when it used to be something that you didn't talk about? You didn't want people to know that you were dealing with this, or someone in your family was dealing with this. And now it's very much embraced and encouraged because we want people to be okay.
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think the answer to both the athletes and the individual, or the corporate setting, is that the power now resides in the individual. And what I mean there is, just like 20 years ago, athletes wanted to play in the biggest cities because that meant that they had the highest level of visibility. They could get the best endorsements, salary would follow, right? All of those things were not of the control of the athlete. With the advent of social media, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Obviously, we know the perils that social media brings about for mental health, but it also allows you to be financially independent and work directly with brands, so that you're not beholden to a team or a corporation in the normal or typical sense of that. And so athletes don't necessarily need to rely on just their contract, because they can live in a small city in the Midwest and still make life-changing money through endorsements and all the other ways that they can make supplemental income. At the same time, Naomi's she's very vocal about it, and it's incredible to see. She's also not the first. I was just watching Untold, the Malice at the Palace documentary last night.
Mm-hmm.
And you saw Ron Artest openly say, I didn't know how to deal with any of these issues that were in my head. And I had a therapist, and she told me to count to 5. And so you see the scene in there where he gets on the scorer's table and lies down, and to the normal fan, he is seen as being arrogant. But what he's doing is he's taking 5 and he's
Right.
taking deep breaths, right? And that was in 2004. So this isn't necessarily new. What's allowed us to be more vocal about it is the power is in the individual. And I think same on the corporate side, the power is in the individual and has moved away from the business, because at the end of the day, the individual makes the business and the groups of individuals make the business. And so you mentioned Naomi, you have Kevin Love, who obviously came out probably about 2016 or 17 talking about mental health. DeMar DeRozan, there's a long list of athletes that have come out, and the reality is there, we put them on this pedestal, but they are just human. And I mean that in the kindest and nicest way possible, because at the end of the day, we all have a job to do. Some are more stressful than others, but whether we're performing in front of thousands or millions of people, or we're trying to produce for the end of quarter results, all of that is still stress, and it affects us in ways that we can't imagine. And so we have to deal with those stressors. To put on top of all of that, you may be dealing with a personal loss, a health issue, anything irregular that's going on adds stress, right? And these last 2 years, we are dealing with political turmoil and a pandemic and all of these things. And one of those is enough to derail your mental health, let alone all of them. So I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for the resilience that we have. And at the end of the day, it's forced us to say, okay, what is best for me? And it may not be best for me in long term, but it's best for me in the moment. And if I can have the best moment right now, and tomorrow is the best moment, and build these collection of moments, it will lead to a better future. And so I think gone, to tie that up, is gone is the traditional, you need to do A, B, C, D, E to climb the corporate ladder, to become a rookie to an all-star. The reality is you need to forge your own path. And if that means you need to take care of yourself at the age of 20, then it's better to do that and not have the breakdown at the age of 30. And it's okay to have them. So that's a long-winded answer just to say that it's been happening, but I think a lot of it is the power has moved to the individual. And as individuals, we are making the best decisions for ourselves. And that isn't something that, our parents' generation has really done when you look at kind of the historical nature of all of this.
Yeah. And, great response to that. And I literally just before we hopped on this Zoom, I saw a tweet from Front Office Sports that Nike shut down their global offices this week to give their employees the week to focus on mental health, as well as more time to decide for their personal, their personal needs, whether or not they wanted to start coming back to the office when they opened offices back up in September, or if they needed more time to get themselves comfortable with that reality. Do you see things like that becoming more commonplace or more acceptance, in addition to employers being more understanding of the need for people to take time to manage what's going on in our heads? Or is it going to be limited to these big corporations like Nike, where they can afford to shut down for a week because they're Nike? And you also look at the Diamondbacks, where they shut down their offices so they could take people to an away game. Everybody on staff flew to an away game to give them a break. I'm curious what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, so the short answer is 100% anyone can do it. And I think part of it is it needs to be authentic to the organization. It doesn't, if you're known for not giving those opportunities to your employees, like, sure, you absolutely should do it, but you don't want it to be in a performative manner, right? Every company can afford to give their people the time off, and it's a competitive advantage. Like, let's call a spade a spade. It is beneficial for the employees, and it is also a recruiting tactic. Mm-hmm. Just like working from home. How many organizations work from anywhere? And it wasn't until this pandemic that we realized how great it is to work from home or work from anywhere and the flexibility that allows. So I think what this is showing is it's adding another form of flexibility. Bumble does it. There's many organizations that are saying you need to take a week of vacation every quarter, or they're shutting down the offices so that there's no, summer Fridays. All of these are instances of that. The difference here is that, and I go back to it, if you have something pop up in your personal life, God forbid a death, or maybe it's just a breakup, that's going to impact your mental health. And if you don't have tools that you can implement to fix your mind and your body, then how can you be expected to perform at work? And you could say that they're two separate things, but in reality, like, gone is the work-life balance. It's really a blend, right? We can do our jobs from anywhere. We can do it from any city at any time. And so if that's the case, then let's take care of each other and take care of ourselves. And if that means you need to go to therapy in the middle of the day, then you can work earlier in the day or in the evening. But I don't think the construct of the 9 to 5 is really, Monday through Friday, is really as applicable anymore. And I think that's a beautiful thing because, like I said, for me, like, I lead 2 meditation sessions a week and I go to therapy and it's blocked on my calendar. And so for me, it's, I know the formula that works for me. And if I can help other people find that formula, then that's only going to make them a better employee. And the same thing is true for athletes, right? If they can figure out the best formula for what allows them to perform on the court, that ultimately translates to wins. And that's what, ownership and front offices are looking for. So it's in everyone's best interest for you to be performing at your peak.
Going back to the athlete side, because you always hear when an athlete gets in trouble that they didn't choose to be a role model. They just had this talent that put them at the highest level of their given sport. But now when you look at people like Kevin Love, like Naomi Osaka, DeMar DeRozan, Ron Artest speaking about his early struggles during his career, how has that impacted the common population in terms of opening things up for those discussions where you might see your favorite athlete say, the weight of what I'm carrying is too much. Here's what I'm doing to make sure that I'm staying healthy mentally. Do you see it's becoming easier for people to discuss that as a result of athletes opening up more and more about it? Or is it just blending in with the common tide that we're seeing where it's in general becoming more acceptable to have these conversations openly?
I think it's a combination of the two, but I'd say, 2 words: representation matters. Just like when you look out on the court and you see someone that looks like you realize that you can be that person. The same holds true for what they say and who they are. So you can say, I can be an athlete who has bipolar disease, or I can perform at the highest level, but have multiple personality disorder. If you don't have people talking about it, you don't know that you can do that. And so I think part of it is athletes coming forward and some of these platforms that are athlete first, that allow you to speak on the topics that are important to you. Once again, they're not going to have financial repercussions for being human and being open about it at this point. And so that obstacle is no longer there. The other thing that you're seeing is you have people like Kevin Love, who not only believes in it, but then is investing in companies like Join Koa, which is an emotional, think of it as like a brick and mortar therapy gym. And I know I'm butchering kind of a description of them, But when you see athletes invest in things that are helpful for your mental health, then you also realize that there's another outlet. So that's the business world that is learning about it beyond just the casual fan who's hearing about it on SportsCenter or reading about it in The Athletic or something like that. And so I think there's multiple avenues there for people to become aware and to spur those conversations. Just like when Tiger won the Masters a few years ago, and the next day everyone is watching old videos of Tiger. The same thing is true about these personal topics when they overcome these obstacles or at least manage them, right? So to me, it's a combination of the two. And I think it's going to continue. The more pressure that we as a society put to take care of our mental health and put that first, I think it's just the more common it's going to be, and the more accepting it is in everyday workplaces.
And it's, I've been happy to see, and again, especially in our line of work, it becoming an easier subject to work with, because it is a big problem. You see a lot of people that just, it's not worth the money, the time, the effort to not be able to have the opportunities to take care of yourself. So it has been nice to see that there is this shift occurring.
Well, and I want to bring something up. So I think the other piece is, for a long time, the conversation was, well, I don't have anything diagnosable. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have any issues, right? If my foot doesn't hurt, I don't have any feet issues. Mental health is a continuum, it's a spectrum, right? And so you look at the work of the Same Here global movement, and their whole thing is, it's not 1 in 5 who have a mental health issue, it's 5 in 5. We're all in the spectrum somewhere. We all are in this together, and literally their namesake is Same Here, because we all have these issues. And you made the comment earlier of these athletes that are, they don't ask to be role models. Well, the reality is they're just human. If sports is potentially, it's their way out of a really bad situation, or perhaps they were groomed to be an athlete their entire career. Both of those present very different mental health issues, right? And it gives you a lot of anxiety, depression, and you're seen as, whether you're a male or a female, you're seen as you can't really talk to people about it because that's a weakness. And so that's on society to change that narrative and say, this is not a weakness. This is in fact a part of who you are. And we all have this. And so, you can't be seen as less than because you have issues. The reality is, if we were all as open as we probably should be, we'd find out that a lot more of us are doing meditation or yoga or in therapy or medicated or any of these things, right? People are just afraid to be vulnerable because society has not allowed us to be vulnerable and rewarded that. And I think that's true in the sports world as well, where you're always told you need to perform because there's 400 people that applied for your job, and if you don't want it, someone else will take it, and you better work long hours and outwork them, and it's a boys club, all the stereotypes, you name it. But the reality is if we continue down that path, we will be left behind, because it's just not, that's a very toxic type mentality. Mm-hmm. And it's not inclusive, and it's not what's best for any individual. And so hopefully, with new generations of leaders, whether that's, our generation, millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, whomever, who are a little bit more supportive of it, we will start to see an even deeper and bigger shift as it relates to the mental health on a spectrum.
Let's a little bit unscripted, you've mentioned some tools. What are some things that you do? You mentioned you lead a meditation group, you do yoga. What are some things that you do to help yourself? I know I found over the past 2 years when I was working through how to handle not working, and the anxiety and the uncertainty that came with that, because what I wanted to get back into, it was a small pool and there weren't a lot of openings, and I knew it would be a waiting game. But despite that understanding, there's still no really good way to feel great about that situation. I found probably the biggest saving grace for me was hiking and getting out into the woods in New Hampshire and just going for 12-hour monster walks a couple times a month. And that was, what kept me grounded and helped me to center myself within what I was dealing with, but also allowing it to not consume me. What are some things that you have found that have helped you? And you've got the tools out there like Calm that provide guided meditations. But what if you don't mind sharing some tools that you find effective?
Before I jump into that, I'd say, what you just described in the hike there is your version of a moving meditation, right? It's very, whether that's weightlifting for some people, silence, sitting, moving, lying down, it's just a form of moving meditation. So you found out that works for you, and that's great. The other piece that I'd add is, you kind of hinted at that, the last 2 years have been tough for you. And I think what I've learned is that my guess here is that Bill associates and identifies as being in the sports industry to some degree. And you lost that identity a little bit. And so it makes sense that you're looking to rectify that. And I found that a lot of that, like I had this shift a couple of years ago that rather than have a chronological resume and say Eric is at the center of the wheel, and then there's Philanthropy Playmakers, and there's BMO, and there's Intersport, and Eric is still in the middle of this circle, but each spoke is something different. So it's yoga, and it's travel, and it's meditation. And one of them is a career, but it's not everything. And the moment I was able to reimagine what that looked like, I realized that it's such a small part of my life, albeit it takes a lot of hours, right? But it is not, I don't identify with my career in that sense, because there's so much more to me that helps define who I am. So that was an initial shift that I had. When I lived in Memphis, I did a lot of yoga. To me, yoga is one of the most calming things that I can do. And it doesn't need to be hot yoga where you're burning calories, but literally just, stretching and connecting the breath with poses. I go to the Bahamas every year for at least a week or two, and I do a yoga retreat that is part yoga, part meditation. I just came back from a silent meditation, my first one. And as someone who struggles to live in the present moment, silence is really beneficial for me. I'm also on medication, and I've been messing with my medication, whether it's the dosage or the right medication, for the last year. And the reason I say that is as someone who grew up watching his dad take a ton of medication, I've always been anti-medicine. But my therapist told me, if you could take your ruminations from a 10 to an 8, is that something you'd be willing to try? And I was like, that's a 20% improvement. Yeah, absolutely. And so it helps with that. I don't think I mentioned therapy, but for me, like, that's a safe space, an hour a week. The consistency of having someone that you can vent to, that you can work on problems that can challenge you is fantastic. And it's a life-changing thing for me. Meditation is another one. You mentioned Calm. There's plenty of apps, Headspace, Peloton, Insight Timer. They're all very good from a guided meditation perspective. I've really enjoyed teaching meditation and doing, my own unguided meditation, and just sitting. And I think the biggest thing is just repetition. So for me, I've got a routine, and I'll wake up and the first thing that I do is I meditate before I do anything else. It's also the last thing I do right before I go to bed, so that I can clear my mind of everything and I don't have these thoughts sitting in my head. I'm going back to those ruminations. And the reason I say all of that is I used to go to therapy, and let's say I had therapy on a Monday and I finish it, and then something comes up Monday evening, and I would be like, shit, I have to wait until next Monday or 2 weeks from now until
sitting on this one for a while. Yeah.
I'm going to be sitting with this for a week. And then I started doing yoga on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I was like, great. Therapy's on Monday. Something comes up Monday night. I have yoga that can clear my mind. And then I'm like, oh, what about when it's Thursday? Now I have to wait till Monday. So as I added more things, I was able to limit the lows, but also limit the highs. And that's important for me, because I was just able to step back from the emotion, identify it, see, oh, I'm reacting to something, or, oh, that triggered me. Like, that comment triggered me, and that's why I'm upset. And once I was able to disassociate from that, I was able to see that I was just reacting. And so these are all tips and tricks that I've learned, but that helped me get from, a therapy session to a yoga class or something like that, so that I'm not just sitting in my head all day long. And what I've said works for me, and it may not work for others. The example I'll give is my girlfriend came on this retreat with me. We went on it together, and we both were like, this example wasn't really for us, but she realized that sitting as a meditation is not nearly as valuable as walking. And it's just like what you said, Bill, like hiking is incredibly meditative. And so I think it's not a one size fits all, but as long as you're willing to give it a shot, I think some of these tools are really transformational in life, and at least they've helped me and many other people, just find a little bit more peace, a little bit more balance and tranquility. And, it also puts a little bit of a spotlight to realize that, like, life is pretty good and it's short, so let's enjoy it, versus wallowing in, our own self-pity or things that come up. And that's not to say that we can't have things that come up, but when you're dealing with a crisis or a life-changing event, you don't want to feel helpless. You want to feel like you've got it and you're able to handle it. And so the reason I'm such an advocate for therapy, and I think there's something to be said for, like, you're going through a breakup or a loss of a loved one and you go to therapy because of that, you should stay in therapy even when you're over that issue, because the moment you go to therapy with an issue, you're too late. You need to be working on yourself proactively. And so I always say I'll be in therapy for the rest of my life, whether I have any issues or not, because it helps me stay in a preventative mind, where I am not only working on myself, but I'm preparing myself for when inevitably something happens in life, because it does. And I think I found that it worked for me. And once again, it may not work for everyone, but the more conversations I've had about it, the more I've seen other people open up to me and share their thoughts. And I've learned things that I otherwise would have never learned about others. And so I think that vulnerability is really key.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your story and experience with it. This is, like I said at the top, a topic that I've had on my mind for a while to dig into, and definitely not one that I'm done exploring, because there is a lot going on with mental health in the sports industry. So thank you for coming on and talking about this with me. But before we wrap up, I did want to ask you a couple of questions I like to ask everybody, just so we can get to know Eric, not the sports professional, but you, the person, a little bit better. So shake up the first one a little bit. What is the best personal development book? Given the topic, I thought the change would work. What's the best personal development book that you've ever read, you're currently reading, that you're looking to read? Take it away.
Yeah. So the best, I don't know if I classify it as personal development, but it's called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And I'll kind of just give you the headline here. It's, what would it be like to be free from limitations and soar beyond your boundaries? So interpret that as you will, right? Personal boundaries, professional boundaries. But for me, one of the most transformational books I've read, because, and I'll give you a quick story about there. They have this chapter called The Inner Roommate. And it's like, what if you lived with this person who said, Eric, your hair is too long, you talk too much, your voice is too deep, you eat too many snacks, you need to go to the gym, you were lazy. You would tell that person to screw off, right? All I want to do is sit on TV, on the couch, watch Bachelor in Paradise and relax. And this roommate of yours is like, go do this, go do that. You're not enough. You would tell that person to move out. You kick them out. The reality is that's your mind. And it happens every single day. And that concept to me was literally just like, it blew my mind. Because it made me realize how many limitations you put on yourself. All the fear and the doubt that creeps into your mind. And so if you can disassociate from that element, who's to say that you can't start your own company? You can't become the first president. The sky is truly the limit, and the only thing holding you back is yourself. And as someone who's kind of battled those demons from, starting a company, or in your case here, like, working on a podcast, you said, you've had a, getting back into sports, like those are all issues that where doubt can creep in. And so if you're able to realize that in the moment, tell that person to, kick rocks, that's a lot easier. So that's something for me that has been a life-changing book, and one that I kind of read every, 4 to 6 months, just to continue to, relearn those principles.
Interesting. Heard of it, haven't read it, but like everybody that comes on here, I feel like half of my bookshelf right now has been filled up with recommendations from my guests. So it's going in the shopping cart.
That's one of the benefits of starting a podcast.
I'm just doing it for book recommendations.
Uh-huh.
Next question. Who are you following? And this can be an influencer, a thought leader, basically somebody, if they post something online, say something on the radio or TV, you've consumed it, you're reacting to it as quickly as possible.
I mean, some of these are cliche. Adam Grant is, the psychologist, is just phenomenal. He turns things on his head. He's a great author. So plenty of his books, and anything he says is probably share worthy immediately. I think the work that Eric at We're All a Little Crazy in the Same Here Global Movement is doing, in conjunction, like you said, with the Clubhouse, those are stories, and the work that they're doing that I want to consume, because it just makes me realize that there are more people like me than that aren't like me. That's a good question. There are some, I'm really fascinated by the for-profit side of mental health, meaning what apps are, the apps, or some of these just companies that are taking a for-profit approach versus your traditional nonprofits like an AMI. Mm-hmm. So those are things that I keep my eye out on. There's a whole therapy Twitter world, which I just think is kind of funny, in the sense that I like to see what a therapist, how they interpret the world. And so I follow a lot of that and will read some of those articles. But the sports world, I think some of those are, there's not anyone in particular, but it's those first person stories talking about how they overcame these obstacles, and all of that has to do with their mental health, whether they've mentioned it or not. So I tend to read a lot of those, whether it's on Twitter or The Athletic, some of those. So I like to consume some of those feel good stories.
Yeah, we all can use plenty of those throughout the day. Last question, and we'll wrap up. What do you have your eyes on over the next 3 months? It can be anything that you're keeping an eye on.
Yeah, I'm really curious right now. We all had anxiety heading into this pandemic. And not to say that we're heading out of it, but I'm very curious to see what happens when people return to an office. It's been 2 years since people have been in an office. So new habits have been created. What is the anxiety that comes from being back in an office, from dealing with a commute? I think this time has been coined the Great Resignation, right? People are realizing what they want to do in their lives. So I'm excited to see that come to fruition, whether it's happened or it is happening, because tomorrow, not to be cliche, but tomorrow's not guaranteed. So what are you doing today to make sure that, it goes back to something we talked about earlier. Like, anyone could be on here talking about their career path, right? You may gain a couple insights and you may be able to connect with them, but it's like, what have you done to positively impact the world or someone else? That's what's going to be talked about long after we're all off this earth.
Right.
And so if you can live in the present moment and think with that mentality of, who are you changing? Who are you impacting with this podcast? Who are you, do you pair this with a mental health professional, like a psychologist? And do you say, the month of, we're going to do Suicide Awareness Month or Prevention Month, and we're only going to have licensed professionals talk then? You have a platform that you may or may not have realized that you have, and listeners and viewers can relate to what people are discussing. So by harboring these conversations, you're doing these things every day. So my point there is just like, I think we're going to see a lot of people do that, where it's like, life's too short. We don't need to work for 30, 40 years of our lives to enjoy life. I need to enjoy life now.
Right.
Because, what we've learned in the last 2 years is nothing's guaranteed.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, Eric, thank you again for joining me for this. It's not always an easy topic, but that's the point of having this conversation, is it's becoming easier to discuss these things. So thank you for helping me kick this exploration off. And I hope you all enjoy that, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.
And all I'd add as well is if there's anyone that's like, oh, I'm curious about this, or, I'm happy to help share resources, whether it's helping find therapists or just share experiences of like what it's been like to be on medication, or, what app I prefer. Happy to kind of make connections there wherever, because we're, not to be cliche again, but we're all kind of navigating this together. So it's something that happy to be a resource however I can. So thank you.
Yeah. So if to echo that note, if anybody is interested in connecting with Eric, this episode, like all episodes of A Cup of Coffee with Bill, get posted on LinkedIn. Send me a message, send me an email, and I'm happy to introduce you to Eric, so he can share whatever it is that you're reaching out about. So take advantage of that. He's one of the industry's best. Eric, thank you. It was a great conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Have a good one, guys.